You think you know betrayal until you discover your loving husband of 5 years has been living a completely double life with another wife and 3 children in the next town over, and you're not even his real wife because he never divorced his first family. But what he didn't know is that I'm a private investigator who is about to expose his bigamy in the most devastating way possible at his other wedding anniversary party in front of both families at the same time. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah, and I need to tell you about discovering that my entire marriage was a lie and how I exposed my husband's double life in a way that destroyed everything he had built with both his families. For 5 years, I thought I was married to David Chun, the perfect husband. David was 38, worked as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, and seemed to adore me. He was attentive, romantic, and everything I had dreamed of in a partner. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, where I was working as a freelance private investigator, and he was supposedly meeting clients. David was charming, successful, and treated me better than any man I had ever dated. After dating for 8 months, David proposed with a beautiful ring and a heartfelt speech about wanting to spend the rest of his life with me. We had what I thought was a perfect wedding at a small venue with about 50 guests, mostly my friends and family, since David said his family lived far away and travel was difficult for them. Our marriage seemed ideal. David was loving, supportive, and financially stable. He traveled frequently for work, which I understood was normal for a sales position. He was usually gone 2 or 3 days a week, but when he was home, he was completely present and devoted. The only unusual thing about David was how private he was about certain aspects of his life. He didn't like me visiting his office, saying his company had strict policies about personal visits. He handled all of our financial accounts and said he preferred to keep business and personal finances separate. And he was oddly protective of his phone and laptop, but I attributed that to work confidentiality requirements. I never suspected that David was living a completely separate life with another woman and her children just 45 miles away in Salem, Oregon. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I discovered that my perfect marriage was actually an elaborate fraud, and how I used my professional skills to expose David's lies in the most spectacular way possible. The first suspicious sign. The first thing that made me suspicious happened 6 months ago when I was doing laundry and found a receipt in David's pants pocket. It was from a Chuck E. Cheese restaurant in Salem, dated on a Tuesday when David was supposed to be in meetings with clients in Seattle. The receipt showed purchases for pizza, drinks, and game tokens, typical items for someone taking children out for entertainment. When I asked David about the receipt, he seemed flustered for a moment before explaining. Oh, that. I had a last-minute meeting with a client who brought his kids along. You know how some of these small business owners operate. They don't have regular childcare arrangements, so sometimes I have to adapt to unusual meeting locations. The explanation seemed plausible, but something about David's reaction bothered me. He had seemed nervous and had taken a moment too long to come up with a story. As a private investigator, I'm trained to notice when people are lying, and David's response had several tells that suggested deception. But I loved and trusted my husband, so I dismissed my professional instincts and accepted his explanation. That was a mistake I would regret for months. The investigation begins. 2 weeks after the Chuck E. Cheese receipt incident, I found another piece of evidence that made me more suspicious. David's car had a parking ticket from a residential street in Salem, dated on a Saturday when he was supposed to be at a work conference in Vancouver. When I asked him about it, he said he had stopped to help a stranded colleague whose car had broken down. Why didn't you mention helping a colleague when you called me that evening? I asked. I didn't think it was worth mentioning. It was just a quick stop to help someone change a tire. Again, David's explanation was plausible, but his reaction seemed off. He avoided eye contact and changed the subject quickly. As a PI, I know that one suspicious incident might be a coincidence, but multiple incidents usually indicate a pattern of deception. I decided to do what I do professionally, investigate. I started by tracking David's credit card statements and phone records. As his wife, I had access to our joint accounts and could legally review our financial information. What I found made me realize that David's business travel wasn't what he claimed it to be. The financial evidence. David's credit card statements showed a pattern of purchases that didn't match his claimed travel schedule or business activities. On days when David said he was in Seattle for work, his credit cards were used at grocery stores, restaurants, and retail shops in Salem, Oregon. More concerning were recurring charges that suggested a domestic routine rather than business travel. Weekly grocery purchases at the same Safeway in Salem. Monthly payments to Salem Elementary School for what appeared to be lunch accounts. Regular purchases at children's clothing stores in Salem. Payments to a pediatric dental office in Salem. Subscriptions to children's streaming services and educational apps. These weren't the spending patterns of a traveling salesman. These were the spending patterns of someone supporting a family with children. I also noticed that David had a second cell phone account that I hadn't known about. The bills showed thousands of minutes of calls to local Salem numbers and extensive texting activity. Most disturbing were the life insurance policies, I discovered. David had taken out a $500,000 policy listing me as the beneficiary, but he had also taken out a $750,000 policy listing someone named Linda Chun as the primary beneficiary. Linda Chun appeared to be using David's last name, suggesting she might be his wife. But I was David's wife. We had a marriage certificate and everything. Unless David was married to both of us. As a professional investigator, I knew that financial evidence was valuable, but I needed visual confirmation of what David was actually doing during his business trips. I decided to follow David during one of his supposed work trips to see where he was really going. On a Thursday morning when David left for what he said was a 3-day business conference in Eugene, I discreetly followed him. Instead of heading south toward Eugene, David drove north toward Salem. I followed at a distance, using techniques I had learned during my PI training. David drove directly to a residential neighborhood in Salem and parked in the driveway of a 2-story house with a well-maintained yard and children's toys visible on the front porch. I watched from down the street as David used his own key to enter the house. This wasn't a hotel or business location. This was clearly a home where David belonged. About an hour later, David emerged from the house with a woman and 3 children. The woman was attractive, appeared to be in her early 30s, and was clearly comfortable and familiar with David. The children ranged in age from about 4 to 10 years old, and they all called David Daddy. I watched David load the family into a minivan that I had never seen before and drive away with them. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what I had just witnessed. My husband had another family. Another wife, 3 children, and a completely separate life that I knew nothing about. I felt sick to my stomach, but my professional training kicked in. I needed more evidence before confronting David or making any decisions about how to handle this situation. The deep investigation. Over the next month, I conducted a comprehensive investigation into David's double life using all of my professional resources and skills. What I discovered was even more shocking than I had anticipated. David's other family, Linda Chun, age 34, had been married to David for 12 years. They had 3 children together, Emma, 10, Michael, 8, and Sophie, 4. Linda believed she was David's only wife and had no knowledge of my existence. David lived with Linda and the children in Salem from Sunday evening through Tuesday morning and Thursday evening through Saturday morning. The legal reality. David had never divorced Linda when he married me. My marriage to David was legally invalid because he was already married. David was committing bigamy, which is a felony in Oregon. I had no legal rights to David's assets or income because our marriage wasn't valid. The financial deception. David was supporting both households using income from his legitimate job. He had told Linda that his frequent travel was required for work. He had told me that his frequent travel was required for work. He was essentially working a normal schedule, but splitting his time between 2 homes. The professional lies. David did work for a medical supply company, but his territory was local to Oregon. His business trips were actually time spent with his other family. His co-workers had no idea he was living a double life. David's boss thought he was a dedicated family man married to Linda. The other wife investigation. The most difficult part of my investigation was learning about Linda and her relationship with David. Using public records and social media research, I discovered that Linda was a kindergarten teacher who had been with David since college. She had given up her career ambitions to raise their 3 children and support David's demanding travel schedule. Linda's social media accounts were full of family photos with David and their children. Birthday parties, family vacations, school events. David appeared to be a devoted father and husband in his life with Linda. But what made this discovery even more painful was realizing that David's relationship with Linda seemed more established and authentic than his relationship with me. Linda had David's children, his longer history, and what appeared to be his primary emotional investment. I was starting to realize that I might be the other woman in David's life, even though I had believed I was his wife. The photos on Linda's social media showed David at his children's school events, coaching their soccer games, and participating in family traditions that went back years. Meanwhile, David had never wanted children with me, saying he preferred to focus on our relationship and his career. Now I understood why. He already had 3 children with his real family. After gathering comprehensive evidence of David's double life, I had to decide how to confront him. I could have simply presented him with the evidence privately and demanded explanations, but I realized that David was such a skilled manipulator that he might find a way to gaslight me or convince me that I was misunderstanding the situation. I also felt that Linda deserved to know the truth about her husband's bigamy. She had been deceived just as much as I had, and she had a right to know that David was committing crimes that could affect her family's financial and legal security. But most importantly, I wanted to ensure that David faced real consequences for his actions. If I confronted him privately, he might simply choose one family over the other and continue his pattern of deception with future victims. I decided to expose David's double life in a way that would make it impossible for him to continue deceiving either family. The anniversary party plan. Through my surveillance of David's social media accounts, he had separate accounts for each family. I discovered that David and Linda's 12th wedding anniversary was coming up. Linda was planning a surprise anniversary party for David at their house in Salem, inviting their friends, Linda's family, and David's co-workers. This was perfect. I would attend David's anniversary party uninvited and expose his bigamy in front of everyone who thought they knew him. But I wanted to make the revelation as dramatic and undeniable as possible. I decided to bring our wedding photos, our marriage certificate, and a presentation documenting David's double life. I would let David enjoy his anniversary celebration right up until the moment I destroyed both of his lives simultaneously. The anniversary party confrontation. On Saturday evening, I drove to David and Linda's house in Salem, where the anniversary party was already in progress. I could see through the windows that about 30 people were celebrating in the backyard, including David's 3 children, Linda's parents, and several people I recognized as David's co-workers from his company directory. David was wearing a suit and looked happy and relaxed, playing with his children and accepting congratulations on his 12-year marriage to Linda. I took a deep breath and walked up to the front door. When Linda answered the door, she looked confused but polite. "Hi, I'm sorry, but I don't think I know you. Are you here for David's anniversary party?" "Yes, I am. My name is Sarah Chun. I'm David's wife." Linda's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then growing alarm. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I said I'm David's wife. We've been married for 5 years. "That's impossible. I'm David's wife. We've been married for 12 years. "I understand your confusion. Could I come in? I think David has some explaining to do to both of us." Linda stared at me for a moment, then stepped aside to let me enter. "David," she called toward the backyard. "Could you come here, please? There's someone here to see you." I could hear the party conversation continuing in the backyard while we waited for David to come to the front door. When David appeared and saw me standing in his other house with his other wife, his face went completely white. "Sarah, what are you? What are you doing here?" "I'm here for your anniversary party, David. Although I'm a little confused about which anniversary we're celebrating. Your 12th with Linda, or your 5th with me?" Linda looked back and forth between David and me, trying to process what was happening. "David, who is this woman? Why is she saying she's your wife?" "Linda, I can explain this. Sarah is I'm his wife, Linda. We were married 5 years ago in Portland. Here's our marriage certificate." I handed Linda a copy of our marriage certificate, and I watched her face as she realized what it meant. "David," Linda said quietly, are you married to both of us? The backyard had gone quiet, and I could see people starting to come toward the house to see what was causing the commotion. Linda, Sarah, please let me explain. This is all a big misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I said. David, you've been living with Linda and your 3 children for 12 years while also being married to me for 5 years. Which part of that is a misunderstanding? By now, about a dozen party guests had gathered in the living room, including Linda's parents and David's co-workers. David, Linda said, and her voice was shaking. Is this true? Do you have another wife? David looked around at all the faces staring at him and realized that there was no way to talk his way out of this situation. Yes. I made some mistakes. I never meant for this to happen. The room erupted in shocked voices and gasps. Some mistakes. I said. David, you committed bigamy. That's a felony. You've been defrauding both of us for years. Linda sank into a chair, staring at David like she had never seen him before. 12 years, she whispered. I've been married to you for 12 years, and you have another wife? Linda, you have to understand, I love you and the children. You're my real family. Sarah was just what? I interrupted. Just the woman you married and lived with for 5 years? Just the woman you told you loved and wanted to spend your life with. David's children had come into the house and were watching their father being confronted by 2 women claiming to be his wife. Daddy, what's happening? His 8-year-old son asked. That's when Linda started crying. Kids, go to your rooms, please, she managed to say through her tears. The complete exposure. With David's bigamy exposed in front of both families and his co-workers, I decided to present the full scope of his deception. David, should I tell everyone about the financial fraud as well? Or do you want to explain how you've been supporting 2 households while lying to both of us about your travel schedule? What financial fraud? Linda asked. I pulled out copies of David's credit card statements and financial records. David has been telling both of us that he travels frequently for work. In reality, he works locally and splits his time between our 2 households. He's been using joint credit accounts to support both families without either of us knowing about the other. I handed Linda copies of David's financial records showing his spending patterns in both Portland and Salem. He's also taken out life insurance policies on both of us and has been filing false tax returns that don't disclose his bigamous marriage. One of David's coworkers, a man named Tom, stepped forward. David, is this true? Do you really have 2 wives? Tom, I can explain. There's nothing to explain, I said. David has been committing bigamy for 5 years. He's defrauded both of his families and violated federal and state laws. I turned to address the room full of shocked party guests. I want everyone here to know that Linda and her children are innocent victims in this situation. Linda had no idea that David was married to someone else, just like I had no idea he already had a wife and family. I also want you to know that I've already reported David's bigamy to the police and the district attorney's office. He'll be facing criminal charges for his actions. David looked like he was going to be sick. Sarah, please don't do this. Think about Linda and the children. Think about what this will do to them. I am thinking about Linda and the children, David. They deserve to know the truth about who you are, and they deserve to be free from your lies. Linda looked up from her chair with tears streaming down her face. How long have you known? She asked me. I discovered David's double life 6 weeks ago and spent a month investigating before deciding how to handle it. Why didn't you just divorce him quietly? Why did you have to do this publicly? Because David is a criminal who has been defrauding both of us for years. If I had confronted him privately, he might have found a way to continue his deceptions. This way, everyone knows the truth, and he can't manipulate either of us anymore. David's anniversary party ended with police officers arriving to arrest him for bigamy. Linda's parents took the children to their house while Linda tried to process the reality of her situation. David's co-workers left in shocked silence, realizing they'd have to report this incident to their company's HR department. The neighbors who had attended the party were witnessing the complete destruction of what they thought was a happy family. As David was being led away in handcuffs, he tried one last manipulation attempt. Linda, Sarah, I love you both. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just got in over my head and didn't know how to fix it. You fix it by not committing crimes in the first place, I replied. Linda was too devastated to respond to David's final plea for sympathy. The legal consequences. David was charged with bigamy, tax fraud, and wire fraud related to his deceptive financial practices. He pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have been even more publicly humiliating and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. David was also ordered to pay restitution to both Linda and me for the financial damages caused by his fraud. His employer fired him immediately after learning about his criminal charges, and he lost his professional licenses and certifications. The personal aftermath. The most difficult part of this entire experience was dealing with the emotional aftermath of discovering that my entire marriage had been a lie. I had to accept that the man I thought I loved didn't exist. The David I knew was a character that the real David had created to manipulate me. The real David was someone who could lie to 2 families for years, commit serious crimes, and manipulate everyone around him without apparent guilt or remorse. I also had to deal with the legal reality that my marriage to David was invalid, which meant I had no rights to marital property or spousal support. But the most challenging aspect was realizing how skillfully David had manipulated me. As a professional investigator, I pride myself on being able to detect deception, yet David had fooled me completely for 5 years. Update: I recently heard that David attempted to contact both Linda and me, claiming he's changed and wants to make amends for his actions. Neither of us responded to his attempts at contact. Some betrayals are unforgivable, and some people forfeit the right to be part of your life permanently. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a double life? How do you rebuild trust after being deceived so completely? I'd love to hear your experiences and thoughts in the comments.